Good morning, sunshines. Excellent, I hope you're doing good. Today we're going to talk about platforms and stairs. Yay. Two other basic scenic units. They require a little bit more understanding of construction techniques because if a flat doesn't exactly fit, it's not necessarily going to harm anybody. But if you start falling down stairs or on platforms, you can injure people. And so understanding weight distribution and load and all that sort of stuff, it's like understanding how to build bridges and how not to have them fall on your head, roofs, that sort of thing. So in order to understand that, you sort of have to understand this idea of a thing called stress. Now, I'm not talking about the panic you feel in life, but a stress is a force that is applied, an external force that is applied to something, yes? There are three basic stresses that we deal with in the theater. One is tension. Tension is where you take an object and pull it apart like elastic. Compression is where you take an object and push it together on either side. And shear is when you have an object and you force it from the middle of it, yes? Now, in platforming and stairs, we tend to use wood, and wood coming from trees is really good because trees are really good at handling tension and compression. They're really good at not shrinking and really not good about not being torn apart by the way trees grow. Yes? Trees are not so good about shear coming in the middle when, a good strong gust will break a tree. So one of the things we tend to spend most of our time dealing with are ways of structuring, building our platforms and stairs in order to overcome the shear force. Now, there are other forces. For instance, torque is a force that we'll mention here in a little bit, but torque is twisting, something that's sort of spinning you around, yes? And when you get into things like revolves on stage, you're dealing with torque. But for the most part, tension, compression, even though they're there, the wood handles it very well. The shear is the thing we're fighting most often, yes? Now, let's talk about a couple terms. First of all, gravity. Gravity is a force of nature, and gravity defines what down is. Whichever way gravity is pulling, that's down. Away from gravity is up. And unfortunately, most staircases and most platforms are up, which means that gravity is trying to bring them down. Yes? So, one of the things we're fighting pretty consistently is this idea of this pull of gravity. Now, weight is how much an object wants to be pulled to the middle of the earth. Cody's a very nice young man, but weight-wise, he just doesn't want to go to the middle of the earth as much as I do. I have a much stronger weight. Now, let's talk about the difference between weight and load, okay? A load is the amount of force an object puts on a surface. So for instance, even though, let's just be generous and say I weigh 250, I weigh more than 250. But if I were to leap into the air, which is hard to imagine and I'm not going to do, I could take my 250 and make it nothing, because when I'm in the air, there's no force there. But trust me, my 250, when it hits the ground, after having leapt into the air, well, it's like when you get on a scale initially, the scale goes, whoa, at least mine does. Hey baby, one at a time. And then it sort of settles down to somewhere in the 250 range. So that's called a live load. Anytime the load can shift, because as you walk, you have more, as much as 250 or 500 if you really hop and jump, yes, as little as nothing. So it's a shifting load. A dead load would be like this, whatever this thing is here, podium. It doesn't shift until I lean on it, but it has a weight that isn't going to change. So one of the things that you have to prepare for when you're figuring out how much to prepare for when building a platform or staircase is not the dead load. The dead load is the load that doesn't change. It's not the least of the live load. It's the most of the live load. So let's just say you have 2 characters on stage, and the most you could possibly have is the 2 of them weigh, let's just give it nice round numbers, 250 each. And if they both jump in the air at the same time and land, then we'll say 1,000 pounds you have to resist. All right, now let's say you have 20 actors. We'll make it very nice and make them 100 pounds each, which seems lighter, but as opposed to 2 actors at 250, which is 500 pounds, you now have 20 actors at 100 pounds, which is 4 times as much, even though they are time and a half less. Yes, and that's before they all start to jump, right? So again, you have to prepare for the load at the strongest resistance as opposed to the least resistance. And then once you're prepared for that, I have what's called, there is this thing called a safety factor. Yes? Now, before we get to safety factor, let's talk about strength. Strength is the ability to resist a load. That's the strength of an object. Efficiency is the ratio between the weight of an object and its strength. So for instance, even though I'm sure that I could lift 100 pounds, Cody, can you lift 100 pounds? Yes, Cody says he can lift 100 pounds. If I weigh 250 and I'm going to be generous and make Cody at 150, no way, no way.
Now we're pushing it.
I'm lying about both those figures in different ways. But if he can lift 100 and I can lift 100, but I weigh, let's just make it 125, that's closer, and it's half as much. If he can lift 100 and I can lift 100, but he weighs half as much, he's twice as efficient as I am. If that makes any sense. So that's what efficiency. Efficiency is the ratio between the strength of an object and the weight of an object. So for instance, steel, majority of the time, steel is less efficient because it weighs so much to begin with. But there's a moment where you would have to have so much strength in wood and so much wood to resist the ceiling and the bridges and all that sort of stuff that it becomes more efficient to build large buildings, which take a lot of shear, a lot of wind, and bridges which take a lot of wind and snow and weight changes. It becomes more efficient to build those things out of steel, which is technically heavier than the wood to begin with, but because of the amount of the wood that you need, it becomes more efficient to build out of steel. Yes, and so you want to make sure that you've got that figured out. The breaking strength of an object is how much weight it typically will break at. So let's just say you have a 1x4 and you put it between 2 other 1x4s and they're a foot apart. And you have a 1x4 here, and you put 100 pounds on it and it bends, but it doesn't break. You put 200 pounds on it and it breaks. So its breaking strength is 200 pounds. Yes? Now, you may find some pieces of 1x4 that have imperfections, like a branch or a knot in it, and it may break at 50 pounds. You may find some pieces of 1x4 that are really strong and don't break till 300. But the average, it's a bell curve, the average breaking strength is 200. Now, because there are some boards that are going to be imperfect and break a lot sooner, the safety factor is the number you divide the breaking strength by to get what I call the working strength. So for instance, let's say go use the 1x4. You got a 1x4 that breaks typically at 200 pounds, but sometimes it breaks at 50 pounds, but it also sometimes doesn't break till 400 pounds. I'm gonna take that 200 average bell curve, height of the bell curve, divided by 5, that's my safety factor, and that means that I'm going to never put more than 40 pounds on that piece of wood. If I put more on it, I'm gonna need more bracing because my safety factor is always 5. That means I'm 5 times sure that that thing is not gonna break. I don't have that one knotted piece of wood. Yes, there was several years ago in Kansas City, there was a building that the roof collapsed on when it snowed. And the reason was simply that the construction company got the bid because instead of using a ratio of 5, they used the ratio of 3. And so their bid came up much lower because they didn't have the same support that other bidders had. And so sure enough, it snowed one day and it snowed and melted and refroze and became ice and got heavy enough that it became stronger than the roof was to support it, and the whole thing came crashing down. Yes? So always at least 5. If you're dealing with little children, you might make it 10. Yes? Because that way you're absolutely, positively certain that thing's not gonna break. Yes? So again, breaking strength is the typical strength that is required to break the object, strength of rope or wood or whatever you're talking about. The working strength is the breaking strength divided by the safety factor. Yes? A span is the distance from one support element to another support element. So let's talk about, we'll talk about the platforms here in a minute. Typically in a 2x4, 4x8 platform, 2x4 is the material, 4x8 is the size of it. Having a support every 4 feet is fine. Now, if you're gonna have 20 people on there jumping up and down, you might put a support every 2 feet, which is going to double the strength of it. Yes? If you know that that's going to be mistreated in that way, that's one way that's very, very cheap, very easy. Just construct it twice as strong. Yes? The standard breaking strength for 3/4 ply is 2,400 pounds. That's the breaking strength, which means if you divide by 5, a little less than 500 pounds is what it will hold without having to have any kind of internal supports. I don't like that number, so I will put at least one internal support, which makes it twice as much. So that'll hold 1,000 pounds. Pretty good. I feel pretty good about 1,000 pounds. Yes, I would have to really have a bunch of me jumping up and down to get 1,000 pounds in one small space. Because again, you're going to diminish the amount of space too. Yes, so a cantilever is any kind of extension beyond a support. So for instance, this is very easy. This podium has one support here in the middle, and these parts out here are cantilevered. There's no support in them, which makes it not as rigid as one that would have 4 legs or 4 sides. Yes, more decorative, cooler, leaner. But you have to be careful that you don't lean on the outside because it'll flip over. Yes, the rule of thumb is the cantilever should be half the length of the supporting side. So if you have a 4-foot cantilever, you need to at least have 8 foot of weight on the other side, right? So again, if you're trying to have a bridge or a balcony scene, that sort of stuff, you want to have your supporting element come across and be twice as big as your balcony is. Cool? All right, so let's just talk about standard platforming. Platform, again, is the floor, right? 2 things about the platform. You have to build a platform and you have to build the height. You have to leg it up. So first of all, there are several materials. Plywood is very strong. 3/4 inch plywood is the standard. Sometimes you can get away with 1/2 inch. I would really never build a platform out of anything less than 1/2 inch. 1 inch plywood is just, it's hard to find. It's heavy, and there's better ways of strengthening an object than making a 1 inch plywood. There are boards like MDFs, particle boards, press boards, OSBs. These are boards that are a lot cheaper. Some of them they're made out of basically cut-off materials, sawdust, and or bits of lumber that are left around on the floor that they put into a press with some glue. It's great for things like walls, like fences, yes, to keep people out, that sort of thing. It's horrible for floors, right? Because again, because it's held together with a lot of glue, it responds both badly to water and to heat. So if you're building a deck outside, and you're using particle board, any of those stuff, MDFs, sorry, or OSBs, it's not going to hold up. It's not going to hold. Why spend all that money and have 2 summers worth of a nice deck? It's going to fall apart. They have no structural integrity, right? So spend the money, buy the plywood. Platform. I'm going to show you a little video here about how to build a platform. But let me just, I'll show you the video and then I'll describe it. So here's a little video about how to build a platform. Again, in the video there, a couple things. First of all, they were using 1x8. That's fine. It's just those poor ladies were having to screw into a very thin facing. I prefer 2x4, which is a little bit stronger to begin with, but you could also see that it was on edge to add support to it there. They also, because they were using 1x8, had three internal supports. If you use 2x4, you're only going to need one internal support typically. So again, just you make your choices, you take your chances. The sides of the platform are called the rails. Excuse me. You can knew I was wrong when I said it. The top and bottom of the platform are called the rails. The sides are called the stiles. Any internal brace is called the toggle. It's all the same in every one. And then any kind of vertical piece is called the leg, yes? Again, the rails are the complete length of the board of the platform. In this case, we're building a 4x8, which again is a standard piece of plywood. One other thing I want to point out, the young lady who had the very long hair that was screwing, it didn't actually get caught, but I've had it happen in class where a young lady was using a screw gun and her hair got caught in the screw gun. So if you have long hair, fine, put it up in a bun before you start using a screw gun. Or a saw or anything. It's just you don't want to have that hair get caught in any kind of machine. So having said that, though, you can see the platform is just a basic scenic unit. Yes, easy to build. If you need to strengthen a platform, if you suddenly after you built it decide, oh, this is not holding up the way I thought it would, one of the easiest ways to do it is to add a second layer of plywood on the bottom of the platform. This is called stress skinning. A piece of 1/4 inch plywood added to the bottom of a platform will double its strength. A piece of 1/4 inch plywood added to the bottom of a standard 4x8 3/4 inch platform will double its strength. A half one will quadruple its strength. A 3/4 inch piece will multiply by 8 times the strength that you've given the top, because the thing is, now whatever kind of bow you might have had is getting resistance from below. Obviously you want to screw every 2 feet, and I would also glue it, again, glue the top and the pieces. But stress skinning is a very easy way to add resistance to the platform and increase its resistance. All right, if you have to build something other than a 4x8 platform, if it's a triangle, if it's a circle, anything you've got to build some strange pattern. Steve Parks is the person who taught me this technique, and so I have retained his rules because I found them to be very effective in cutting out and building the platform because it just works. So anything other than a standard 4x8 where you just know the sizes already, go ahead and lay out the top full scaled in plywood, lay all the pieces of plywood out, draw it out, and then on the top, write TOP. That is the most important part of the whole thing you're about to do here. Lay out the platform, mark it all out. If it's a big cloud that you're standing on, mark out the big cloud you're standing on, and then go around and label all the tops of the platform TOP, top. Yes? Then, on the top, draw out your framing. Figure out where your 2x4 is going to go. Again, a 2x4, only 1.5 inches thick. So the easy way to do it is take a 2x4 and just lay it and draw the line. So you now have nothing cut. You have it all laid out there. You got a bunch of pieces of plywood laid around that say top, and you have all the framing drawn out using, and again, you have to remember where the seams are, especially if you're going to create something that has bigger than 4x8. Then you cut out the top and measure and cut out all the external framing pieces. Then you assemble the framing, the pieces, and then you affix the top. Then you measure and cut any internal framing pieces. Yes? And that is true of everything except a triangle. In a triangle, because everything has to be exact, because a triangle, if you change one thing or alter one thing, it changes everything. In a triangle, I would attach the top to the framing pieces and then attach the framing pieces to themselves. So I would flip 5 and 6. So number 1, lay out the top full scale. Number 2, label the top. Number 3, draw the framing on the top. Number 4, cut out the top and the framing. Number 5, assemble the framing using the top as a model. Number 6, attach the top to the external framing. And number 7, any internal framing, cut and fix it. Yes, except for triangles. Cool? And again, that's a great way to remember how to put together platforms that are not just standard 4x8 or square platforms. Cool? Now let's talk about legging for a little bit. Different people have different desires, plans, wants, expectations about legging. The standard legging technique is to use carriage bolts Again, the thing about a carriage bolt is, as opposed to a machine bolt is going to have a nice little hexagonal piece sticking out that can get a knee. So a carriage bolt has a nice little crown to it there, that when you have that on the outside, if your knee happens to hit it or something else, it's going to, because it's round, it just goes right around it. Yes, but that's on the outside, the leg is on the inside, and then you put a bolt and a nut and a washer on the inside. Yes, again, the nice thing about a carriage bolt is it's got a nice little square piece underneath the crown to grab into the wood to keep it from spinning. Yes, you don't have to wrench down. Once the carriage bolt is flush, you're done. You don't have to keep wrenching down. You can, and you can bury that stuff, but it is no stronger than it would be if you just get it to be flush with the surface. Yes, but that's using a standard carriage bolts. Again, you want to have them diagonal. Don't have them next to each other. You want to have them diagonal because each one adds more strength to the leg. Yes. Again, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. As you're putting it on right, you want to use a crescent wrench or a ratchet wrench to attach the nut to the carriage bolt. Yes. Another pretty standard way is to use compression legs. A compression leg just goes from the bottom of the platform to the floor, and then you add a strap on the inside and just staple or screw and or nail it on. The nice thing, I mean, it's quick, it's dirty, they come off very easily. You just take a hammer and knock it off. I would never use a compression leg for more than 2 foot of distance, and I would never use it in the 4 supporting corners. It's only if you have a weak spot really is where you need a compression leg. If you have a weak spot in the platform that's giving, just put a little piece 2x4 underneath and attach it with a strap. Yes. You can also, here's my preference. I've created this system where if you have a standard 4x8 platform and you have what's called a keeper plate underneath, and you screw it to the underside of the top, but you have a hole notched out for the 2x4. So when you put the 2x4 leg in, it fits into the keeper. And then you have another piece on the external side of or the bottom side of the platform that holds the leg in place. I call it a gravity leg. And it just slides the 2x4 in. Sometimes you need a little hammer because the 2x4 is a nice tight fit. And then when you flip it over, as long as gravity is going the same direction, and in my life, gravity has always been going the same direction. Yes. Now, as soon as somebody picks it up, gravity is no longer working in the same direction, because those legs will come out. But as long as you have flipped it over and have held it in place until it's over, gravity will hold it in place, very nice and very neat. Now, if you only have one platform that's sticking out that way, you might also need to screw it. If you have a dozen platforms, they will find support among themselves. As you attach those platforms together, they will gain strength. And you really don't even need to have any kind of attachment to hold the gravity leg in. Yes. Now, another standard way is to create a truss like you would if you were building a wall to a house. Truss is just, again, on your house wall, I'll use that as a standard. Every 16 inches you have a board supporting it. Especially if you have a very tall platform, you might use this as opposed to using a whole lot of labor in 4x8s, because those things are going to weigh a whole lot. You see there a picture of several people using the truss construction down there. There's also a thing called parallels. Parallels are great, especially for tours, because they fold, everything is hinged and they fold up very nice and neat, and then all you have left is the tops all pop off. And because the way the top is, you add a little piece of wood, 1x4, when it fits square, it sort of sinks in, holds the parallel square, and you really don't need a whole lot of attachments usually to it. Unless, again, you've got a lot of people doing WWF wrestling on it, where suddenly you have the weight of the people popping the lid off. But if you just have people walking on it, usually you just place the parallel top on, have it sink down, then all you have to do is just lift it off, close the parallel up, throw it all in the truck. Because again, you're talking about time then, but that's the great thing about parallel platforms. And then again, if you're gonna have a really tall platform, stud walls are your answer. Same thing as a truss, only as opposed to the truss, you got a whole lot of height there, and you may have to plan for ways, egresses, by putting in doors or ways in and out below the platforming. Yes, but in both the truss and the stud wall, you're just taking the simple sheets of 3/4 ply and attaching them to the pieces after you put the stud wall and the trusses in place. Cool. But those are simple, easy ways of legging platforms. All right. Let's talk about wagons, rolling. First of all, casters, or anything that rolls is a wagon. And you're gonna have to have some sort of wheel. There are three basic types of casters. There's what's called a rigid caster, which only goes in one direction. There's a swivel caster, which turns around. Think of a shopping cart. The shopping cart, the wheels that are behind, that are at the handle there, are rigid casters. The ones that are in front swivel around, and so you can drive. If you ever have any kind of wagon that needs to be steered on stage, it is just like a shopping cart. Best to have two swivel and two straight. Sometimes the swivels are called smart casters, and the rigids are called dumb casters. Yes. Now the problem is if you've got a piece that rolls on, but then has to roll off, now your smart casters are on the wrong side. Rear-wheel drive doesn't work. So in that case, you might need 4 smart casters. Yes. The problem with smart casters is if it turns, the smart caster has to have a certain amount of spin in it, and so you're going to have this throw, is what it's called. So the third type of caster is what's called a zero throw caster. A zero throw caster is actually 3 smart casters on a pivot. And what it does, for whatever reason, I'm not a physicist, nor do I put in play one. I just know that you're able to push a zero throw caster that way and pull it straight back, and whatever the throw would have been had it been a smart caster, it's taken out. It goes wherever you want it to go. Now, those things, again, just with all of them, there are weight limits on all of them. Again, a caster is going to cost you, there's 2 basic things that cost you money on a caster. One is the pin that holds the caster, the wheel to the plate. That's going to be a weight limit. And that pin, if it says 100 pounds, again, there is a safety factor. I'm going to assume 3 to 1 from the factory. It may be 5 to 1, in which case I've assumed on the positive side. I don't want to assume 5 to 1 if it is 3 to 1. So if it says 100, it probably breaks at 300. But I'm going to say at 100, they feel good. I'll feel good at 75. But if it's more than that, just add more casters. Yes, or get a 200 caster rated 200 pounds. Yes. The other difference is between what the wheel is made out of. If the wheel is rubber, or if the wheel is inflated, or if the wheel is polyurethane, they all have different reaction strengths and weaknesses. Again, depending on what it is that you're doing. There are a lot of theaters that are what I'm going to call old. And polyurethane is unforgiving. And so if you put a set of polyurethane casters on an old, let's say you've got a stage that was built in the 1920s, that stage is going to creak. That stage is going to go, what in the world have you put on me? And so rubber and or inflated casters are much nicer in that sense because they're going to give a little bit. Inflated gives a little bit more than rubber, right? Again, the problem is rubber, if it's, let's say you bought it 20 years ago, that rubber is going to disintegrate. And so the polyurethane, if you're going to be in stock, is probably the better choice. Polyurethane is typically going to cost you more, but it's a harder, more certain wheel, yes? And again, not that polyurethanes won't break. There are several ways of creating wagons with pivot points. One is to have what's called a jackknife wagon, where you'll have one wagon off right, one wagon off left, and they'll move this way and move that way, and move this way and move that way. That's a jackknife wagon. If they move as a circle, that's a revolve. In both cases, the wheels want to be dumb casters. They want to be rigid casters. Why? Because they want to be put in the way, they want to be attached in the arc of the circle. Because when you push it one way, it doesn't want to have a zero. Now, if you can use zero throws too, but that's a whole lot more money to get the same effect as a rigid caster that moves in and out. Again, if you can afford it and if you have the time, oftentimes on a revolve, it is better to attach the caster to the stage and have the revolve float above the caster. Here's a little picture of that. Again, you can see that's obviously taking a lot of time and energy to construct that nice little track that goes around on those rigid casters. But trust me, that thing is going to move like a charm because you're not relying upon the unevenness of the floor. You've got all polyurethane casters that are holding that nice rigid frame there. Yes. Great. All right, a couple of other things that are typical in platforms, especially in risers, running risers, that stuff. They're called unistrut construction. A unistrut is a piece that is adjustable. It has holes in it and it slides in and out, so you can make it larger or smaller. And then you're going to have a bolt that goes through and will line up. They're great if they're new. Over time, though, they're going to get dinged up and bent, and they're not going to fit exactly right. And especially if you're trying to sleeve it all the way down to a small size, it doesn't quite get there. So it's out there, it's available. I mentioned it here because you're going to come in contact with it. If you have any kind of metal leg, which you might have, sometimes it's because of the design of it, you're going to need a flange to hold it to the platforming. Again, a flange is just a piece that screws into the wood and then allows the receptacle for the pipe to be screwed into. We're going to talk about pipes here in a minute. But again, if you've got a metal leg, you might need a flange to accommodate that. If you have pipes to create your platforming, there are two types of holders for pipes. One is called a rotolock. The great thing about a rotolock is it's solid, holds things at 90 degrees to each other. The problem is that the rotolock only holds a particular size pipe. So if you have 1.5-inch rotolock, you have to have 1.5-inch pipe. If you have 2-inch rotolock, you have to have 2-inch pipe. But it only holds the pieces at 90 degrees to each other. And as you can see from the picture there's sort of a circular thing, and then there's a middle piece of which was showing the other side because there's a little bolt that screws down to add tension to that plate there, which sort of pushes the pipes apart and keeps them from sliding. But that's the way a rotolock works. The other type of clamp is what's called a cheese burrow. A cheese burrow is basically two pivoting clamps. They're separate. You clamp one to a piece of pipe, you clamp another piece of pipe, and you can set it at any angle you want to. So if you're going to join things 90 degrees, I would suggest rotolocks. Anything else, the cheese burrows are the best way to go with that. Cool. Again, as with flats, probably the best way to join platforms together is using coffin locks. But again, a lot of people prefer having the 3/4 inch bolts. So whichever way is standard to your procedures. All right, last but not least, let's talk about stairs. Yay! Stairs are one way of getting from one level to another. There are three basic ways of getting from one level to the other. And it depends upon how high you're going and also the angle with which you're going to go. If you have a rise, and again, the rise is the height you're going to, that will allow you to put an angled platform on to create what's called a ramp. A ramp needs to be less than 7 degrees. My guess is we've all been on a ramp that was more than 7 degrees, and it can be very dangerous. A ramp that's less than 7 degrees, especially less than 5 degrees, you really don't even know you're on a ramp. It takes forever. So somewhere 6-7 degrees is the ideal rise angle for a ramp. The smallest safety zone here is a nice little drawing here that Cody's going to show you. You got between 30 degrees and 50 degrees is where staircases fit. You'll see there's a little distance between 18 degrees and 30 degrees. That's sort of the danger zone. It's sort of too steep for a ramp and not steep enough for a staircase. So usually what they'll do is they'll cut it up into a couple of staircases. So you'll have a landing in between, which will create a long period of non-rise in the middle. Then you have above 50 degrees, you have ladders with fixed treads. Then you have ladders with rungs or cleats all the way up to 9 degrees, which is just a straight up ladder. Yes, a ship's ladder, or a submarine ladder, which just goes straight up and down. All right, so those are the angles with which you're going to find the difference between a ramp, a staircase, and a ladder. I'm going to leave ramps and ladders out of this. We're just going to talk about staircases. Let's just talk about the parts of a staircase. First of all, one of the biggest things you need to know about a staircase is how high you're going to. And then you're going to divide that by some figure. You have the rise, which is the height of each step, and the run, which is the width of each step. I'm going to tell you standard stock platforming for me is a 12-inch tread with an 8-inch rise. And the reason for that mostly is because an 8-inch rise, every 3 8 inches, you're at 2 feet. 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24 inches, that's 2 feet. It's easy math. So if you're going up to 8 feet is 1, 2, 3, that's 2, 4, 5, 6, that's 4, 7, 8, 9, that's 6, 10, 11, 12, that's 8. So it's 12 steps. 10 feet, 15 steps. Easy math. And if each tread is a foot, you know how far you need. To get up 12 feet, you got 12 foot and 1 foot tread, you need 12 feet. Yes? So, again, easy math. 12-inch tread, 8-inch rise. It also fits very nicely into that 37 degrees is what it fits into. If you look back at that other chart there, yes? So the rise, the run. The sides of a staircase can either be open or closed. So in other words, you can have it cut out to look like a staircase, or you can just have a board in which you screw the stair onto it. So that's called a closed riser, or an open riser is where you have the riser that's cut out. Same thing with the tread. You can have a facing in the tread, which is a closed tread, or you can have it open to see through. So for instance, if you had a set of escape stairs where nobody in the audience was going to see the staircase, why waste money on facing the treads? You just have an open tread, right? So again, just as with doors, you have 4 types of staircases. You have open risers, closed risers. You have open treads and closed treads. And any combination of those type of staircases is possible. The other part of a staircase is it can either be dependent or independent. If you have a dependent staircase, it is just a staircase that requires you to have a landing to hold on to. You'll see there's a picture of what's called a French cleat. A French cleat is where you have one board that has an angle receptacle and another board that has a receptacle to the opposite angle, and when they meet, they sort of force each other into the groove, and the landing will support the staircase. That's a dependent staircase. If you have a staircase that has legs, that is standing there in the corner as a staircase or moves around as a staircase, if you've ever seen Hamilton, that is an independent staircase. They're rolling that thing around and it's a staircase no matter where it goes. That's an independent staircase as opposed to a dependent staircase. Again, if you're on tour, the dependent staircases will pack up much smaller. Will take much less time because again, if you're using that French cleat, if that French cleat is the exact same size as the bottom of the treads, the width of the treads, the French cleat will keep it from moving backward and forward. So you literally need no anything to attach it to. You don't need to screw it together. You just pop it in place, and it's being held in place by that French cleat, right? So you have the rise, you have the run, you have the stringers, which are the pieces that are cut out that hold the actual treads. Then you have the well, which is again the whole opening and the floor above. And then you have to have that headroom. How tall is it from the top, from the nose is the front edge of the step. From the front edge of the step to the bottom of the floor above needs to be at least as tall as the people who are going to walk underneath it. I'm going to say a standard door is 80 inches. So that's what I'm going to go with. The distance from the toe of the staircase to the bottom of the upper level needs to be at least 80 inches. Again, there are people, Shaquille O'Neal, whoever's over 7 foot, whatever, have to duck. But for most people, that 80 inches will be fine, yes? And then you have the total rise, which is the total distance from the floor you're going to the finished floor you're going to arrive at. Just before I go any further, here's a little video about how to build stairs.
So when I'm thinking about building stairs, or when you're thinking about building stairs, what are the 2 or 3 things that you sort of have to get right?
Well, you have to get the riser height correct.
That's our step up from one step to the next, the riser.
That's right. And you have to think about that being a comfortable step, step up. So 7.5 is the magic number that you try to get to.
Yeah.
All right. Under 8, over 7 is always comfortable.
Right. So that's a good size, and they can't vary that much between step to step. They can vary a little bit, but.
Well, you take one run of stairs right here. If the riser height changes, and not each one, but a total of 3/8 of an inch or more, technically that stairway is illegal.
So we need a level of precision and comfort in terms of the height, and then the step itself, the tread where we put our foot.
Well, you figure that's an average about 10 inches, 10.5. So if you take 2 steps on a riser, you want to be around 26 to 27 inches is the right number to be at.
Okay.
Okay? But when you're figuring out stairs, you have to calculate the height from point A to point B.
First floor to second floor, for
You have
example.
to think about what finishes are going to be on this floor and what finishes are going to be on that floor.
Hardwoods here that are 3/4 of an inch, tile there that's half an inch.
So let's take a situation like this right here. If I'm going to measure from this floor to that floor, I know that the finished floor, whatever's going to go on that floor, is going to go on this floor.
Yeah.
So the thickness is exactly the same. So now I can actually take my measurement and I can go from rough to rough.
69 1/4.
And that, now if I put finished floor on the bottom, it'll be 69 1/4.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I've just added that in. Over here, I have one last stringer to cut. The important thing is once you calculate the height for the riser and the height for the tread, I take my framing square and I put those 2 dimensions on my framing square.
Rise,
Right.
run.
Correct, and it's 7/11/16, goes right here with the edge of that, and 9 1/2 for the tread.
You lock it in there, this is set up, and you can do it for every stringer, every step.
Right, they have all kinds of little attachments that you can put here. I like a long straight edge in case I run it along the edge, and maybe there's a knot, and those little tabs would fall in that notch.
Okay.
So now I have a straight run, I go up here like that, and I mark them all off.
Yeah.
All right. Once I've cut my first one, I then mark it. I'm going to just mark it. I just go template.
So instead of going back to this for stringers 2, 3, and 4, you go back to the template, lay it out, and use that.
Right, because if I laid each stringer out with my framing square, I could be off a 16th or an 1/8 inch on every one of them.
Start tight, use a template.
Right.
All right, you've cut a couple of these already.
Yeah, I started cutting it. It's my last one. All right, so I'm going to cut these if you want to finish the cut up with the jigsaw. All right, that's it for the stringers. Let's get this one screwed in place. Just lay the bottom right on there. Drop it right down. Perfect.
Good there.
All right, let's get this screwed off. That stairway's done.
Excellent. So now you're all carpenters. Okay, lastly is the handrail. First of all, there are several parts of the handrail. The newel post is the part of it that gets its strength, yes, at the bottom. The handrail itself, again, in America, 36 inches. In other parts of the world, with shorter people, it's less. But in America, 3 feet is the standard handrail height. Again, I'm sure that you've been around the world or around rooms where you reach, just like the doorknob, you reach your handrail and it needs to be right there, and it's down here or it's up here. You're like, whoa, this is a little off, but you know, it's even an inch, your body knows, right? But 36 inches is the standard height, and again, that goes from the nose up. A baluster is any kind of internal support. The whole thing, the handrail, the baluster, and the newel post is called a balustrade. That's all 3 parts. Yes. I think that's all the pieces and parts of that. The waist is the angle of the bottom end, the bottom edge of the carriage. So the angle of the staircase is the waist. Yes. Cool. Cool. That's enough about platforms and stairs. We'll see you next time.